Hej, hör ni mig allihopa? Hjärtligt välkomna hit. Very welcome here. Today we're releasing Public Art Now, Out of Time, Out of Place. And it's an overview of projects of temporary projects in the public space over the last 10 years. And it's been produced by Situations. Claire Doherty is the editor. Situations in Bristol, in collaboration with us at Statens konstråd, and also with the European network NPAP, which is a network for public art producers trying to work in new ways with the notion of public art throughout Europe. At Statens konstråd, we have since 2 years back been working with the line of what can art in public space be. So we did a campaign of posters with quotes on what it could be, reimagining why we're doing it. We have done a number of talks. We also did the Creative Time Summit in the autumn, which was a way of kind of mapping the field, because it's very difficult to do a survey show over public art or practices of socially engaged art or whatever, because they naturally don't fit in an exhibition space. So the summit was in a way an attempt to do this kind of study of a lot of projects next to each other. And this book is now the next step in this discussion and this investigation, I guess, into what art in public space can be and how it can look, have many different shapes and versions and formats. This also combines with the line that Situations have been running as a program which is called Public Art Now, which is actually doing pretty much the same as we are doing here, but in the British context. And also MPAP was formed very much to kind of see how can we collaborate on pushing the lines and limits of the public practice. I think that we are witnessing now, we have been witnessing maybe the last 5-10 years, but there is a moment where we see a shift and a new interest, and we see a lot of artists actually themselves stepping out into the public realm. And it's happening, I think if we look at the history back, we will find two different lines of history. One is the official public art, which is commissioned usually by public funding, and which is often conditioned by the percent for the art or 1%-regeln, which then needs to be connected to a building somehow. And then we have another line of art in public space, which is very much initiated by artists, and it's very much an independent practice. Or it could be independent art organizations stepping out of the institution, claiming independence, interacting with the everyday, with the street, with people where they are. And I think we are now at a quite interesting moment where we see more alternatives of platforms for different versions of public practice. And we also see institutions like Statens konstråd, like Koro in Norway, where Bo is running the the temporary project program called Oro. So we see an intersection of two different traditions in a way at this moment, and that will actually be the focus of tonight's talk. Where are we? Why? What are the driving forces to create those new platforms? Because I think all of us here definitely agreed earlier on today that this is not the easiest way to do. It's rather laborious to work outside where no conditions are set, where everything is in flux constantly, and everything you do will be changed by the circumstances and the context. So why are you putting all this effort into doing this, and what is the driving force, and what is actually the moment that we're witnessing right now? I would like to start with Claire. And Situations has been running for a number of years, I think 10 or something like that. 13, and it's based in Bristol, and yes, could you maybe just talk about a little bit also about like the field and why are you engaged also in publications and not just in production?
There, is this on? Hello. There we go. Hello. Really pleased to see everyone here. This organisation is a real inspiration for us in Bristol, and I think one of the things that's very interesting when you think back to the most transformative cultural experiences that you've had, for many of us sitting here, it's been in the public realm. For me, it hasn't been in galleries and museums that I've had the most amazing art experiences. It's been outside in different locations, in unexpected locations. And I think Situations was born out of a feeling that I had in the late 90s, which was that the most interesting ways to commission artists was an invitation to respond to a very particular situation. But the reason why we've been working all very hard on pushing the limits of what we understand public art to be, you might think, you know, why do we need to define this thing? Because artists are making new work all the time. What's the reason for that? And the reason is because whenever you talk to a young artist or a young curator or a funder or another commissioner or a city council about public art, an image comes into their head, which is some bauble on a roundabout. And actually artists usually run kicking and screaming from public art commissions because they feel it will curtail their creativity. Funders and commissioners are very, very instrumentalizing in terms of the kind of work that they think will result from public art commission. So I think what we've at Situations have felt to be very important is the best way to learn is by working with artists and producing projects, but we also want to tell the story of those projects in different ways to different people, so that it's not just about talking to the art world, but it's about saying, actually, in a project such as this, Ruth Ewan's brilliant piece, which was a song sung by 100 buskers across London, all at the same time, this brilliant socialist ballad of accounting. How on earth do you tell the story of that project, where it was heard by lots and lots of commuters? If you imagine coming up out of a tube station, you'd hear the song, this very strident song, political song, and then you'd go down and get the tube and come up in another tube station and hear the same one. So it was as if, you know, this kind of political movement was overtaking the city. So in that case, there was this sort of infiltration of the public sphere, which was really interesting. But if I said to a commissioner, I'd like to commission a piece that actually can't touch, you can't really say what it is, we don't really know what audience there is, it's going to involve 100 performers that, you know, don't really know each other or speak to each other, it seems incredibly vague. So we have to find a better language and a set of terms that, first of all, we can help to help artists to realize visions that we can't even imagine yet. And I think you mentioned the new platforms that are emerging, particularly digital platforms and the way people are experiencing culture. We also have to find the language to talk to funders and commissioners and cities, to involve artists in the planning and the life of their cities in a completely different way. You'll see somewhere in these images some images of projects we've worked on in Oslo, in Norway, where we took the public art programme that was suggested and turned it on its head, and instead came up with projects that are going to unfold over many, many years. So we completely inverted what we understand to be permanent public art. So, and finally, how we talk and nurture young curators and producers. One of the things we've all talked a lot about is that producing public artworks of the kind that are in this book, very different kinds of approaches, requires very different skills than curating in a gallery or museum. And that's because you're negotiating all the time between the way in which the artist wants to see a project unfold, but also trying to imagine what that encounter is going to be like for an audience member that might never have intended to have an art experience. So that unintended audience that might encounter that work for the first time, how will they find out about it? How will they become involved? How will they share their experience? How do you create deep exploration? So Situations method is that we always work in partnership. We produce projects, some very, very short in periods of time, some very, very long. Our longest project is 100 years long. We're in the second year so far. It's going to outlast me, unfortunately. But underpinning that is writing and research and sharing and professional development and discussions. And through that, we can only make the project and the producing better.
Thank you. The structure that we are doing tonight is kind of short presentations and then kind of a discussion around that. Anyone want to? I mean, I think Matteo and Judith from the Visible Art Award, which is a prize. Yes, so sorry. I will start by introducing everyone. So we have Claire from Situation. We have Krister Wallström from Koro Uro, I mentioned before. We have Stella from Mossutställningar. And Stella is also the founder, actually, of the European network MPAP. So she operates in Stockholm at Mossutställningar. Judith, Wielander and Matteo Lucchetti are from the Visible Art Award, which is part of the Michelangelo Pistoletto Foundation, which is then founded by Michelangelo Pistoletto, the artist. Yes, I forgot my question.
One of the things I wondered, maybe as a kick-off from that, is this idea of learning in organisations, you know, and so often I think one of the reasons why I wanted to set up Situations was that I was trained in a gallery environment where you just move from exhibition to exhibition to exhibition. There was no chance to really learn from each project and to take the skills and approaches you developed in one project to another, and I felt very much that was at the heart of setting up the European network of public art producers, this kind of learning from each other somehow.
We'll come to that. Now I remember the question, which was that you actually started Visible by making a book. So I thought that was interesting. Why did you start with a book?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me? So yeah, we are very pleased to be here, and we are very pleased to be here on such a happy moment of releasing such an important book. And yeah, it's interesting because we also felt the need to publish something, to really set not really the boundaries, but actually to break the boundaries that in which public art had ended at some point in time. As you were saying, we are talking about a momentum that in some way is spanning for like the last 10 years or something. And coming from the Pistoletto Foundation, that was a foundation, an institution started by an artist that had already institutionalized itself. We wanted to around the idea of public art, around the idea of art in the social sphere, we wanted with the book to expand the notion that we have been that the foundation had been working with up to that moment. And in order to do that, we wanted to expand throughout a global context the idea of social engagement. So we invited 9 curators from all over the world, from different contexts and area, different places where different commissions, different productions were taking place, in order to understand social engagement from the art in different shades, in its different shades. And by doing that, we also set the conditions through which the award could start. And the award was really about producing and sustaining existing practices that needed resources to continue what they were doing, or to implement what they were doing, or to move forward with what they had already started. So long-term engagement or shorter-term engagement, but definitely artistic projects that were affecting other areas of society outside of the confined world of art. So the book was really the idea to set vocabulary, and to do that by sharing this reflection with people that were operating in different areas. Also not to make a Western idea of social engagement, especially at the beginning of 2010. That's when we started, yeah. I also have a question for Claire, because it was very interesting when you mentioned about a kind of audience that was not meant to have an art experience, but found itself in this art experience. So I wonder, in this long experience or situation, how much have the institution learned from the audience? Because then you get a feedback that you would have never expected most of the times, and that's really magic moments, I think, no?
It's such a good question, because I'm going to sound really annoying and say it changes every time, but the very interesting thing is, you know, the way in which funders talk about feedback. So there's this notion that that feedback is, did you like it, did you not like it? You know, so or did it, you know, the classic sort of survey question at the beginning of evaluation is, you know, did it make you happy? It's like, God, really? So you know, the idea of an audience response, of course, has completely changed, which is that an audience response, for example, to Michael Selsdorfer's Folkestone Digs, where he buried gold under the sand of a beach in Folkestone, the audience response is a gold rush, you know, and actually part of the gold rush is greed, antagonism, also a collective coming together and gathering. So, you know, the response is also that it might be a provocation that results in the participants or the audience doing something they didn't expect to do. So I think it's or it might be that they contribute to the work. So in Nowhere Island, the audience contribute to the writing of a constitution, a crowdsourced constitution. So I think that's what's been interesting that we've learned, is that artists kind of show us the way of how that audience response changes, really. Yeah.
Now, just to say that is very interesting because it goes back to the Umberto Eco's idea of the open artwork, of the 70s. So an artwork that is in an open form, to the point that even audience can contribute to it, and not necessarily in a paternalistic way, but actually in a way that is acknowledging the role of the audience. So.
And it's interesting that, isn't it? Because it reminds me of Paul O'Neill's brilliant phrase so he did this book with us called Locating the Producers that was about long-term projects. And he said one of the factors of a success is creating space for the unplanned, which of course goes against everything to do with health and safety or risk assessment. It's like you say that phrase to some council, sort of, and they're like, space for the unplanned, what do you mean? So it's that's a sort of interesting thing. It's like we always smuggle that in. It's
Stella, could you say something about MPAP and why did you want to create a European network? Why was that important with the connections to other places?
So I started Mossutställningar in 2004, and the idea was not only to utilize the empty properties that stand in this otherwise overexploited city, but also it was inspired by the likes of Creative Time and Art Angel to try and follow the vision of the artist instead of the framework of the budget and the date and the place. So, but doing that in a country where there's very little rich people and very little state and community funding as well. Sorry? Sweden, yeah. On top of the challenges of actually producing the works, I felt the need of learning from other actors in this field. And at the time, it was only really Mossutställningar and Mobile Art Productions here in Stockholm that operate in that way. So it was a way to try and create a critical platform, but also a productive platform for the initiatives that have sprung up around Europe since the mid-90s, really. And they're along the line of a whole spectrum. So they're both artist-run initiatives, but also state institutions like Skor that have now been closed down in Holland, the Netherlands. So that was really the main entry point for starting a European network of public art producers.
And what did it mean? Or what happened with it? Could you say something about that?
What happened with MPAP?
Like, what did it contribute that maybe also things that you didn't expect it to contribute?
The network itself?
Yeah. Or the work of that exchange. What did that mean?
Ooh.
I'm just thinking that I think it was interesting actually when we had worked with Creative Time and NATO said, "Oh, but we feel so lonely because in New York we are the only ones working there. They have public art fund as well, but he was expressing this feeling of being lonely, and I think that when we get together, I mean, I should mention that all of us here are actually part of this European network, and there are more people around. And we also expanded it from European to expanded network, so we could include Creative Time in it and others. But it was, I think we all kind of shared a feeling that it's quite hard work because usually the structures aren't even there. So and how can we kind of we have this colleagues that are very close to us, even if they're not geographically close. And I think that was, I think I have benefited enormously from you starting MPAP in that sense. sense of kind of feeling of sharing this very particular experience, which is very different to other ways of producing.
I think I was really, I didn't really know what to say about what happened, what that I didn't expect or that I didn't want. I think it was a very pleasant surprise of the network that finally you had colleagues that you could discuss the nuts and bolts of production of art in public realm with. And those discussions were, of course, not only positive, but also critical. So it could evolve our own practice and our way of thinking of the organisation.
Oh, I wonder if there's something, I guess for anyone not involved in that field, I think one of the things that perhaps to explain what that loneliness thing, not to make us sound like we're all really sad, lonely individuals, but what loneliness feels like in what we do is that if I have a discussion with a colleague who's a gallery curator, they will usually say to me, but it's a really complex exhibition that we've got to do. We have to work out the transport and all the rest of it. But we're choosing, the next artist, the next big thing. So their set of values and their set of operations are so different to what we would have to face within the public realm. So we wouldn't necessarily choose an artist according to whether they're the next best thing or whether it fits into an exhibition program, for example, in a building. It would be about actually what's the relationship between the artist and place, or the artist and situation. It could be someone we've known for 10 years. We've been watching their practice. So the choices that you're making are very particular. And also the set of negotiations you have to go through to make a work live in public space are so different because you're usually working with people who are non-art specialists. So when you're a gallery curator, you're working within the art field primarily. But when you're producing this kind of work and commissioning it and making it come to life, you're starting that conversation from scratch every single time. This is an image from Creative Times project with Paul Chan, Waiting for Godot in New Orleans. And you can imagine working in that environment is hugely challenging. So I think what we mean by, I'm sure many of you have had sort of peer groups of where you've exchanged things. And what we found was that actually in our own countries, there were very few who had our experience. But if we went that a bit wider in Europe, actually there was about 30 to 40 producers and organisations that were working like this. And it was like suddenly saying, oh yeah, it's really frustrating when you get to that point and you're trying to keep the integrity of a work, but at the same time negotiate for it to happen and health and safety and everything else. So that's I guess what it means when we say that it's lonely in some ways.
Yeah, that's right. But another surprising aspect was also that when we start talking about creating the network in a conversation that you and I had, I remember particularly talking about the value of educating the commissioner to be able to take risks. Because when you produce a work of this type, you never actually know what the outcome is going to be. And so you need to convince your commissioner that they're willing to take that risk, and at the same time have quite high-level discussions with them about what their perception of art is and why they particularly want to work just with art and nothing else. Why don't they want to do a marketing project or whatever it is? What is it? And are they willing to take the risk? So I think one of our agendas was really how can we help each other to educate ourselves and our commissioner and the artists involved in that process. And so I think one of the surprises was at the end of the network, Magdalena was appointed director of a state institution that commissions art. So I think that was a very exciting end note of that 2-year network or EU-funded network phase. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's been very interesting to. I mean, my before I started here, I founded and ran Mobile Art Production Map, where I invited artists to do commissions, and it's. I think it's been very useful to come from being an independent actor and thinking about what a state institution can be, and it's been very much. Thinking from the side, I think, and rather than knowing the structure, thinking what can we use this for, or how can it be more useful for artistic practice, which is a lot wider than the definitions that we used to have. And I think, I mean, we have a few projects here that I think that are, I don't want to actually draw a line between permanent and temporary, because I think that permanent projects can be amazing when there is the sense of them being there for a very, very long time, for instance. So it's more about kind of bringing new life into this and being able to experiment more, because we know when we have a very set commissioner, it's very hard for us to do everything we want to do. So we started up this format of temporary projects more to find a format where we can experiment and have less restrictions when we start to investigate the process with the artist. And so I think we will see more of those maybe intersections in different ways. And you were running before me, I think, because Kuru was running Uru since the way back. And I'm very curious because your background is in the quite controversial Boktruppen, the theatre group. And the projects you have been producing within a state institution have been very controversial, and I'm very curious to hear, how do you manage to do extremely controversial projects within a state structure?
Well, when I came to Public Art Norway, they wanted me to kind of see on a program that was art that was outdoor. And if you look at the history of, now I have to tell the context, because the context of each country also different. I should do it short, but when you look at public arts that started in the 1970s, the 30 years they've been running, it was always commissioned on order, work on order, and the art was always following the architecture or the construction. That made it a very industry and very automatically, and when they got this, maybe sometimes a school wanted to have a sculpture outside, they call it outdoor. And when I came, I had two questions, and that was first, where is the artist's own initiative to this public space? And hasn't actually public art only been in semi-public spaces for 30 years, not in the public space? That is for everyone, where everyone should have access, that the fundamental is democratic and diversity should be. So if the artist hasn't been there on own initiative through the states, but in many other ways, then the state is a failure, I think. So we started to make a program where the artists could come with their own initiative for a project that we then had to move, because we have to then reorganize us, because public art couldn't follow up because they were they've done this other thing so long. And so in a way that program turned us totally around. And also because it's also based on democratic values of letting everyone in and get access for the public space. Politically, it's difficult for them to change that, because it's on principle and values. So in the first year, 15 projects came about or apply, and now there's almost 200. So when it comes to controversial, it's the artist that is controversial, and we have to kind of frame it, and then you have to question the role as a producer, that I think is still also not defined. And curators sometimes becomes producers, and the producer also in visual art. If in theater, film, it's very, very close to commercial things, but in the visual art, it's not. So we started to produce these things, and then of course when the state, then you have to take risks, and the state is very conscious of not taking risks, because it creates a lot of unpredictable reaction, of course. Discussions that you can't control. You can't be authoritarian, or you can't kind of lead the discussions, because the people has to react and discuss what happens. And if you also are in this space where everyone is actually having an access a lot of people means a lot and should do that. That's a healthy public space. So in that sense, I think that's why also the controversial came about. And of course, it's been a challenge for the state to take this. But we never go into the artistic work. We work a little bit like a dramaturg in a theater production, that you have a voice, but the voice is not inside the actually artistic work. So we frame it with, of course, the practical, technical, because another thing that was surprised me was it's so restricted, this area. It was totally restricted. It was almost impossible to get there for an artist by himself. Now it's totally impossible if you shouldn't be civilian obedience or means civil olydnad. So we had to create a kind of network with lawyers, with people that knows how the society is built up. And we have this network, and now when we get a project, we always go there and kind of check it with those people, and they always know how to handle those different kind of, because there's a lot of project that it's not welcome in a way, and we have all those restrictions to make them stop them without telling the actual truth why we don't want them. And to get this around those, you have to be, first of all, very flexible, but you have to know how our society is actually built up. And that takes some time, and it takes some experience and some risks. So that's a little bit like we are doing.
So you would say that you're not actually really curating the works, but you're producing them, and there's this, because I think that when you work with those kind of works, it's very, I mean, the producing is part of the curating.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's like, as I say, it's this. You can't define the division there. That's absolutely right. But when we have like external people that is independent that look upon those applications. And I am also part of this, what do you call it, like a group of people that look upon the applications. So it's not politicized in a way, but there's absolutely, you can discuss that. And then it goes for experience, it goes for what is actually possible to do, and all those kind of discussions. So, and then you have to take the responsibility, and the responsibility is actually, it's two things. This, as I say, the democratic space. I think for when you said the question why I'm doing it, it sounds a little bit technical, but it's to actually keep this space open and keep it public. Because I see that the public space in society is increasing in different ways, a lot of different reasons. And to keep, even if we have those social medias, they doesn't function as this public space. When something happens in society, people meet in a physical public space, and they are increasing. So somehow in Norway also, like the social public, I mean, relations, people doesn't meet anywhere. It's it's a rich country, but people stay at home because they have very expensive apartments. So, I mean, the public space is not only art, it's also social relation, you know, and all those things are increasing, I think.
It's interesting, though, because as you were talking, I was thinking one of the most interesting things could be to think about how these projects begin. Because it feels to me that in public space that it's much more diverse how an artwork begins than in a gallery or a museum environment, because an artist might have a studio, granted, but it's the working out of a work is much less necessarily coming from the artist's practice than sometimes from an invitation. So that might be from an organisation that want to work with that artist specifically, and then gather the funding around it and start to make it happen. Or it might be from an invitation of a commissioning brief, or it might come through a developer, or it might come through the artist's spontaneous act, you know, through the artist initiative. But it's so interesting that when you talked about open submission and this idea of a proposal, that's very particular, isn't it, to public space? It's very particular that there's a proposal that then often someone then decides whether or not that there's permission to do it or not, and how in public space there's also, in terms of street art, there's a very rich area of culture which is actually not seeking permission, and that's absolutely at the heart of making it happen. So I was interested with Visible, like how do the beginnings of a project affect? Because in your case it's the jury system, isn't it?
For us, it's very interesting because you are representing also institution organizations that are commissioning that artwork, so they are giving a quite clear frame, maybe very often also objectives or expectations or goals that maybe the artist should in a certain way also reach. And we are with Visible, we are doing a research in a global context, really more rather on projects that are initiated by the artists for their interest in a certain urgency or in a certain context or problematic, and that they are starting a project by themselves in a certain way. What is very interesting, because of course they have not a framework, so they have to invent their framework. So we are not giving a format, they are inventing their formats. And what we are doing, we are following these projects also in a certain way. We are trying to bring them in, again in form of discussion on this project in the public institutions, because we think also that in these projects very often the artists are developing organizations, or they are really changing the format also. For example, we have...
Can I just ask a technical question?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure everyone will know what it is. Sorry, from my perspective, just to understand. So when the jury makes a decision, and it's a public jury on who is awarded the Visible Prize, so the invitation is a financial award, is that right? But it's completely open to how they spend that money.
Yes, right? we are giving the prize. We're giving to the artist, to the project, and it's we are always asking for projects that are already ongoing. They're not started, so they're not. It's not a proposition, but it's already a project that is developed over years, maybe. And so we are entering in a certain way also to implement this process. Maybe it's a process that is tired because maybe it's run by artists or initiated by artists. Maybe they have not founding, so the energy is a little bit low. So we are coming in that moment, and in a certain way we are implementing again the process, how it was also with the Silent University that was the winner of the last edition. So it was a moment of this project that it was interesting to get this money in a very quite independent way, because it's also it's founded by a private institution, foundation. So we are quite free also how to handle in a certain way how we deal with the artists also in the way to give the money. It's not a very easy process. It's not bureaucratic. We try really to understand also the needs of the artist and the project in that sense. So we are trying to find very light ways to handle this part also in that sense.
And another thing coming to what you were saying, it's interesting as curators, because then our role there is not so much about commissioning the work, of course, but it's more about in this year that the project is awarded, we give our availability to the artist. And it's interesting, now we have only done 2 editions, we're working on the 3rd, and how differently the artists have understood that. So our role as curator is the most flexible possible, because we have to be ready to handle, you know, we did a festival in Colombia and we handled things we would have never imagined to handle. And with Ahmed, actually, we found an artist that had very clear ideas on what he wanted to do. And then we helped him more in aspects that he didn't consider yet about the project. So more about communication, more about implementation of certain other aspects. So what we also like as curators, because I think curator doesn't mean anything, can mean everything. So what is really vital for us is that we keep our role like free to change, to adapt, depending on the artist, depending on the project. And that's what a curator can really be, I think. When it becomes something totally professionalized, institutionalized, it loses also the capability to respond to reality. So that's great, yeah.
We were mentioning before the function of kind of reinventing things. I think that we all recognize being brought to places and situations that we could never have imagined, and then having to kind of find solutions, or is that part of that?
Totally, totally. I'm now thinking to Colombia specifically, but yeah, because when we embrace the global context, we also wanted to really get out of the predictability of certain also procedures, processes that sometimes when you have, despite the context of having an artist creating his own format, but when you do it within a Western context, there are still some frames that are in place,
But that's a really interesting thing, though, because the question is, do you avoid the frames? Okay, so do you reinvent something with the backing of a private foundation or an art angel with a set of angels that allow you to take a long period of time, put the artist at the centre, be driven by the artist's vision without any parameters? Or do you try and reinvent the frames? Because, I mean, that's what you've done with Visible as well, but there's something interesting there about, I mean, I guess for us, we don't have the financial ability to do that, apart from maybe one or two projects where we've had a grant that they've said, yep, just make an exceptional project. And it's like, great. But mostly there's reasons why we get the money. So it could be Arts Council funding in the UK, or it could be a public art programme in Oslo, or it could be a festival, or cultural tourism, or cultural well-being, or social impact, or any of those things. So one of our questions is, to what extent can you still do what you would do there with an artist and allowing their vision to be at the heart of it within those boundaries? And I must say that there are times when we have made the mistake to think that we can change it. And there's probably been 2 projects in the last decade, I would say, where it went completely wrong because we just couldn't change the parameters, and it really, really compromised the artworks. But most of the time you can change it.
Yeah, just to reply to this, from the Visible perspective, we have at least 2 dynamics. One is with our foundations, because it's not just Pistoletto Foundation, but it's the funding institution that is Fondazione Zegna, a private enterprise in Italy. And with them, on the structure of how Visible continues and how it reinvents the format, we definitely have to use existing frames and try to reinvent them, try to discuss with them how to reinvent them. But from them, to convince them about doing the jury in public was a long process. The first edition had no public jury because they couldn't accept the idea. But then we worked on it, and we really tried to bring them examples and show them what could be the potential of it. On the other hand, this kind of constant negotiation with the institution, which is also very productive for us, because that's when new ideas come out with this also antagonistic relationship, then we also grant a free space when it comes to the artist. And that's also why as curators, we always, in the contract we sign with the artist, with the award, we say that we are some kind of guarantee. Yeah, we are responsible. So we are the ones that take responsibility for the artist. So we give that freedom because we are the one that keep the relationship between them and the foundation. So we grant the prize. It's going to be handled by the artist, but we keep checking, and we keep checking also how can we help in that, but not so much in terms of you should do this or that. So you were saying also about this before, as a dramaturg. So you don't write it. I mean, you write the context, but actually it's the artist that then interpret it, and you have to give that freedom as something.
Could you just say a little about the public jury, how that functions?
Yeah, I don't know if we are like inverting the.
You just go on. Yes.
Okay. The public jury is something that is definitely in evolution, in the sense that we did that for the first time in 2013, and it was possible thanks to the collaboration with the Van Abbe Museum and with Charles Esche as the chairman of the jury. And we worked with him for 1 year, really shaping the format and really trying to also involve the museum in this process. This time we are working with Tate Liverpool, and the third jury, public, for the second time, will be in the 4th week of October. How we do it is basically to curate as much as possible what comes before. So we have a committee that is composed of the people that were part of the jury or the public jury in previous editions, and with them we do a pre-selection. And with the pre-selection, what we basically do is make sure that every project that has been nominated or came through an open call respects the parameters of being a project that is already ongoing, that needs money to continue to have a broader impact. So we really check on all these things. And then we make a short list that will go to the public vote. But without this curating, the conversation couldn't take place because you wouldn't have a common ground. So we need really you need to curate a lot in terms of really the dramaturgy of this needs to be, you need to take a lot of care about it. The evolution consists in the fact that, for example, the previous one was a more traditional jury where we had jury members that performed their role first in front of a public. So they made the first round of vote explaining why and assessing all together in front of people the reasons why they thought this project should be in the final or not. And then we got few finalists, and then the winner was voted by the jury plus the 50 people in the audience. So the final the winner really came out of a public conversation. So and also the jury changed their minds because people were intervening and they were saying, you know, opinions that maybe in a normal jury they wouldn't come up. And also another element that was very interesting, because when you are a juror behind closed door, you have the secrecy, you know, that you can say whatever you want. When you're in public, if you say something, you have to be careful. And you have to be sure that it's really what you mean and you can justify it. And it can be tricky. Transparency can also have can be very difficult, but if you curate the process up to that point, you're sure that those projects, you know, can also be discussed publicly because, you know, they're not just ideas, they exist. So they're already granted their, yeah, sure.
I think that brings in a really interesting question, which is consultation. So often we're asked, why aren't the public involved in choosing the artist? And sometimes they are, but there's a really awful thing that happens in public art commissioning, which is this sort of fake consultation. So essentially the proposal from the artist is put out there to often a targeted local community to say, you know, we want to hear your thoughts. And that's really just a tick to get it through planning permission. So I think one of the things that we've been looking at is to talk about expertise in a different way. So how you might think about the artist and the producer, curator, is that they have a particular professional expertise and knowledge of looking at lots and lots and lots and lots of different kind of ways of working and different art forms in the public realm. And they exchange that expertise for local expertise. And that might mean lots of different opinions from lots of different residents. So not to target a community, because that doesn't exist, but much more to do with very different opinions. So you get an exchange of expertise, as opposed to trying to imagine that local residents would have the knowledge of lots of different artists or ways of working, you know. So, and I think that's for us a more interesting thing than consultation. So it goes back to this idea of opening that jury process out, which is sort of inviting people into the discussions, but not somehow then expecting them to understand how to make a judgment, you know.
I think that's very relevant when you work in a local area, that the people who actually live there are the experts on the context. They know the stories, they know the background, they know what happened before, they know what people talk about. And I think we didn't actually mention that, but I think that, or we mentioned it briefly, that with these kind of projects, the context is so vital. They exist and they're colored all the time, but by what happens around them. And so I think the question, like, do you want this or this artist, or you know, what artwork do you want, is not relevant. But the question of what is this place and what's going on and what are people talking about, that is a knowledge that the artist will need to be able to do good work. And it's very interesting of how you also say you curate something in order for it to be possible to be participatory. It's not just a given, but you have to kind of curate the participation, if you like.
And coming back to the relation of expertise and experts and practitioners that are participating, we are now in this next edition. We are trying now to not only have the expertise in the parliament, because we will give to the jury session the shape of a parliament. But we would like also to invite practitioners that have followed or have been part of the process, of artistic process. So that's for us also a very new challenge in a certain way, to create this dialogue also on in between users and experts that are talking about the project. So that's also the next step as we would like to do.
Bo, did you have a comment?
No, yeah, we have this a different way, but we have had some projects that has been proposed from the artist. This is a very small place called Rjukan in Norway, where they didn't have the society didn't have sun from October to March because of the mountains around. And this local artist wanted to make this sun mirror, and he proposed this for a long time, many years. But the community didn't want this because they wanted to use the money somewhere else. But this was totally connected to the context and their everyday life. But he measured it out that they could have like 100 square meters in the middle of the community on this piazza, sunlight all year. And and we went in and we said this has to be. We said that we would like to produce this, so we put a lot of money into it. And they then started those groups on the internet where they were against a long time, like 3 years they were against, and then suddenly it starts to be a movement. And after a while they became, because there were only 3,300 people, and when they went over, we started the project. And it took 5 years. Today they have those 3 mirrors, and I was there at the opening, and there was like 3,300 at the opening. They all were there, they all had sunglasses, they all were there on the piazza, and they're all there. But they had their chance to tell what, to be a part of it. And when it comes to kind of those 20-second memorials and things, there's not that they should be maybe, but if somebody the neighbor do something with your mailing box without asking you, it's not what he does. Is it just hasn't asked, hasn't involved, makes no. It's arrogant in a way. So I think there's a different way of approaching this.
Yeah. No, I'm curious about this notion of conflict, because it seems like how that could you say something about how you look at conflict, Bo?
I don't know. I was just looking about like Palestinian embassy. This is a project that the artist could never do, and the state could never do because it's political. So we are in the dependence of this project, and flying this balloon over Oslo in the center of. You probably have it in Stockholm also. You can't fly anything in the center because of the terror law. When you apply for this, you need the authority of our institution. When we apply, we don't say what colors is on the balloons, because it doesn't say in the application. If you say this is the Palestinian colors, or it says Palestinian embassy, I'm sure they would have taken this approach differently. But we use democracy in a way that it's a hot air balloon. It's going to fly over Oslo this and this time, and we got this is also 2 tanks. And this is a little bit a critical piece by Morten Trovik. With tanks, and he wanted to do that with the Norwegian tanks from the military in Norway, because it's a little bit like the intervention of Norway is not in war, but they're still there, and so on. So he's doing it very context, yes, no, pointing it to each other at the opera house where all the millions goes. So then we asked the Swedish military to borrow 2 tanks, and with the Swedish military, they laughed. They loved to give Norway 2 tanks. Because everyone who knows the history of war knows, well, this is funny. So we didn't stop it. Then again, we can use our authority, and it's not against the law to borrow those tanks. There was a lot of hassle to get it through the customs. but we bought it and we painted it and then we repainted it and gave it back afterward. And of course the Norwegian military got, pissed off, but that it's not against the law. It hasn't offended anybody. So those things, and that's also why I think I don't like the word flexibility, but I like the mobility that we have to, as a producer, we have to kind of be with the art. The artist project as long as we can, and use the time. If it takes time, it takes time. Just to stand there and follow the art project, and then suddenly things starts to happen, I think.
I would like to invite the audience if you have any comments or questions, or yes, we have a microphone here. Is it, Isak, is it coming? Or
yep.
Yeah, it's here in the front here. And of course it's fine to, if you prefer to speak in Swedish, you're totally welcome, and I will make a translation.
So I can't help thinking of Krister and his wife. They were so collaborating. Do you hear me this or no? Yeah. Closer. Okay, yeah, thank you. Krister and his wife, they were using time and working with authorities. It really resembles this, what you're describing. And I just find it's very impressive as an artist that curators are also willing to take risk. That's too rare, I find. So, and wanting to work together with us, I think that's marvelous. Thank you.
I know that Magdalena has asked me to say something about the controversial project that actually grow bigger and out of control in a way, and that is two artists, Fadlabi and Lars Kusner. They in Norway last year they celebrate 200 years of the Constitution, the Norwegian Constitution. For 100 years ago, they had this world exhibition in this park. And they found out that in this amusement department, there was this Congo village. They called it Congo village. And there was 80 African people living there for 3 months outside in this kind of native kind of picture of how they live at that time. And they got very surprised. One of the artists is from Sudan. And I mean, there was in no history books, there were nothing. I didn't know about it. People didn't know about it. The school didn't know about it, and it was totally some kind of a collective memory loss. So they wanted to take this up again and make a reenactment of the village 100 years after, at the same time and in the same period, to make it known. For the schools, for the history books, and for the people, because at that time it was a huge success. Almost 1,800,000 people were there, and at that time Norway was just 2.2 million. So in 100 years, I mean, by a generation, and when we started this, they open up with, we're going to do a reenactment of this 2014. And of course that exploded. We never expected that in a way that we thought this was very important to kind of map this again and discuss also up to a contemporary scene what is misrepresentation, what is representation with people coming from other countries today, and what about Norway? Are they, question themselves, because it's an important discussion, because there's just a few organizations that actually map this, and of course very good one, anti-racist organizations, but they have the agenda. And they also got they got so angry, and we have to discuss with people we respect to try to find, because they thought so. They just got this, of course, again, their own picture of how this art piece is going to be. everyone got the picture of how it's going to be and how it's going to look like, and then they start to act.
It's here. It's
from
this
there.
one, right?
Yeah. So this is, and those people is actually from Senegal, but you call them Congolese, and you can see this is a postcard. There was, and this is the entrance at the same place, and that is also, and that is the entrance there, and this is the reconstruction is coming there at the opening. And of course, the thing here was, and this is the Belgian flag, and the embassy of Belgium wanted us to take the flag down because they didn't want to have that history back. But we didn't, and that was also, we called the lawyers and they said, you don't have to take them down. They can't, you know, in any way say that you should take them away. But then again, what happened was that it's like 3,000 or 4,000 media all over the world about this project. And what happened in the media was that they heard one story and then didn't go to the source. So they made this from a feather to, you know, a chicken kind of thing, and you couldn't stop that. And a lot of aggressive discussion came about, and trying to, in one way, I always say that if, you know, Tate would have done this project, they would have 20 people working on it, because to handle it, we were 2 people. But of course, and the state was totally nervous. But they couldn't, the thing is that we couldn't censor it because there's no pre-censoring. It has to happen before it can actually be discussed.
What I find really interesting about that is our responsibility. So the kinds of points we all have on lots of these projects, that there's a degree of, we're worried about exploitation or provocation for provocation's sake. Okay, so that there's a questioning process you have to go through to say, well, what do we think is going to happen, and are we happy about why we are doing this? Like, what are the intentions underneath this, and is anyone being exploited in this process? You know, and I think it's this combination of ethical integrity, critical integrity, and artistic integrity, and we do a lot of that in the team, you know, before we're about to embark on a project that we think we have to take it to our board and say, artistically, this is really sound, ethically, this is sound, and critically, this is really sound. And I think if any of those 3 don't quite stack up, you know, you have to kind of really question why you're doing it. An example would be in the case of Nowhere Island. It's a story I've told you many times. In the process of that project happening, and I think you're right about, sometimes these questions come up in the middle of a live project as opposed to before. And the artist, we weren't getting as much media coverage as the artist wanted in the middle of the project because it was in the middle of the Olympics. And he said, I've got this new idea. I want to take this Arctic island that we were towing around the coast, and I want to take it out into the international waters, and I want to declare it as a refuge for Julian Assange. And I was just like, what? And so we had 3 days of arguments, and what it came down to was the ethical integrity of the work was that it was a blank space. It was a space for people to imagine what a new nation would be. And if he did that, which we could have done with the tugboat taking it off, it would have closed it down as an artwork. It would have made it merely that it's the refuge for Julian Assange and about Julian Assange, as opposed to it being a new nation. So I think there are those moments when you have to, it's really hard, you have to really, really question your motivations, actually.
For instance, in our case with the jury, I mean, if we wouldn't curate it as much as I explained before, it would be much more of a game. And actually, it happened that there were other juries that were done in public for the sake of transparency in the Netherlands, for example, and it was interesting to observe that they adopted this model without really curating the whole process, and with the proposals, not with the existing projects. And then the media were in the jury, and the media completely wrote the most terrible review about an artist's proposal, an artist that in the art world is extremely respected for research and for scrutiny and seriousness, but there it was completely exposed to just a game of transparency for the sake of transparency of itself. In our case, transparency is not our goal. In our case, the thing is really sharing an experience of collective learning through the jury. And that's why we take so much care about how the jury is going to be set up and how the artist's position can be totally respected and presented in the most respectful way. Yeah.
My name is Louise Lindström, and I have a couple of questions about the images that you show here. For instance, there is a chap with one leg, and there is also some things that I do recognize, various controversial and discussed public arts, like the one in Norway, the island, to commemorate the terrorism, touch there. And since I became handicapped myself, I'm curious to see if there are any connections between these things. I mean, this chap with one leg, why is he in the images, and where are the images from? How can I find out where they come from?
I would say the majority of the images are actually from the book. So, so buy the book and you will find out. Yes, and then there are a couple of references that we put in from these organizations. The man with the leg, yeah.
That's a work that was produced by Mossutställningar in 2006 as a response to a commission by Old People Homes Property Owner and Developer called Mikasa Fastigheter AB. And they wanted us to produce a work that was situated in the communal areas in the old people's homes. And instead we convinced them to make a social work with a collaboration with Sophie Calle, a French artist who was chosen particularly because she is interested in the borders between private and public, and all institutions that you are transferred through in life, such as daycares and schools, and also old people's home, have that intersection. And so we asked Sophie Calle, she wanted to be part of the work, and she proposed an already existing work from 1984 called Los Angeles, where she's interviewed 40 citizens, and she's asked them, if Los Angeles is a city of angels, where are the angels? So it's a portrait of Los Angeles and its systems of belief. And even though it wasn't really what we expected, we were a young organization. It was the first commission that we did. So a learning experience from that is don't call a superstar artist and expect them to well, basically she said yes, but she proposed a lesser work, and instead of taking that conflict with her, we accepted the work, but instead we took it as a starting point for a social practice, social work which we ourselves curated, or I curated. So we had lectures about Sophie Calle and her practice in the old people's home, and the residents who came there were then asked to volunteer to be part of this project, which we explained. And it was to adapt, firstly, the work of art that Sophie Calle had suggested herself, and secondly, to adopt her methods of practice to produce their own work. And what's interesting about this is also the commissioning process, because what they wanted, as you may recall, was to have a work in the public realms within the old people's home. So what we did was both in the end. So the people, the volunteers, the old people's home, like Bill, who you saw portrayed, he adopted the work, curated the installation of it in his own home, and then showed it to both his neighbors and his friends and family, and then told his story and his relationship to the work and to the artist. So, and then he got a student to send on a commission. He is an architect, and he was really interested in neoclassical architecture and was quite a critic of modernist architecture. And so he sent his agent, as it was, to the square of Sergels Torg to investigate if it was really functioning as a proper square. And the student who took pictures and observed the space showed that there were people using it as a football game place. Old women were feeding pigeons in the place. Alcoholics were having a good time drinking. So, and then this work was then toured to old people's homes around Sweden. So that's the explanation between.
I think it's interesting also to say, I agree that when you see those works, you don't actually really understand them. And I think a lot of the kind of works that we are producing like this, they are a story. So it's not an object that you can photograph, but there's a whole story to every project. So that is why also, in a way, they're a bit confusing and don't really. I mean, you see something burning, but you wouldn't really know what it is, and so they actually need a longer. I mean, I think that the storytelling of those projects is essential.
And I think maybe that's one of the nuts that we haven't cracked within the network yet, is how to represent and tell the stories of those works.
I think this is an attempt to kind of do some of them, and I mean the book that you did is also like, but I think there are lots of more ways that you have to find out.
Yeah, we've started to talk actually about film being a much better way now of telling the story of a project. So static images, what digital recording and filming and its integration into websites allows you to do is to have very different voices speaking for the work. So instead of instead of the critical text, I think critical text is still important, but it's usually one person's view, and even this is written with that sort of with the different producers telling the stories of the project. So I think what's great about film is that you have collaborators, participants, audience, artists, lots of different people telling the story of what the project was. Of course, it depends who's the editor, but yeah, I think that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm Ragnar Berlin. Anyway. So, what's the importance of documenting? Because the artwork, as I understand, is the event. So what's the importance with documenting?
Can I just say something about the video and also get into this question? That the jury actually, the presence of the shortlisted artists is not by having them in person, because we don't have the funds to fly all the artists from wherever they are. Sometimes they can be in very remote places. So we prefer to give them a budget to produce a short video, a 5-minute video, that is going to narrate about the project. So again, the video as a tool to talk about these practices. And about documenting, for example, in our case, we realized that by doing the research for the award, we were building an archive of practices. So we have in our website, you can go through and we're actually implementing for the coming months a new way to cross the archive of projects, but we already have an archive of almost 200 projects existing, operating all over the world, and we want really to make them more available. That is very important. So to document their existence and to make our website also a place where people can access them and make them even more available. And we also, in our plans, we always had the idea of documentaries as and it's something that we can definitely have to discuss within MPOP our European Parliament of Public
I
Art.
think I think it's a very good point there in terms of documenting, because it is about creating our own history for this work, and the book is a part of that. It's actually saying there isn't a history. There is a history, of course, but there's not a documented history, and it makes it very difficult to particularly to nurture artists and to say what has been before and to learn what has been before, and also funders, and to make the argument for what we do. But I'd say documentation isn't something that only happens at the end. It's something that happens during a project as it unfolds. So the nature of tweeting, social media, Facebook, films, the way in which people will capture a project on their own phone is the very nature of our culture. So you ask a young person under the age of 15 now, how do they communicate? And they do it through images, you know. So their experience will be, if it's a live experience, will be their first reaction will be to take a photograph. So it's inbuilt now into us. I think that the documentary tick. Maybe sometimes it's nice to do ones that there's no documentation of at all. But
I will also agree. It's extremely important to document, and not only now, but there has been a lot of project that has gone wasted. Because the museums, at least in Norway, they have totally lack of performative works, performance, totally lack of those kind of interventions in society and things like that. They have no interest. So, of course, it shouldn't be our job, because it's actually a museum who should do that. But we have to kind of take care of it. And we also have, if you go on the website to Public Art Norway and go to Uro, there is movies, and there's also a fanzine that is a kind of the storyteller of each project, but also a lot of writers that, or people that is not art historical or art critical, because in somehow the art critics of those projects also are lacking. And I think there's, of course, different meanings behind that, but one is, for me, is that the art critic lack that kind of knowledge. If you have a Palestinian embassy, you have to, somehow, you have to know something about that conflict, the history, and then it's more interesting for us to go to that source to get an historical point of perspective, because they are also part of a public space. So this is very important for us to have that diversity also in the documentation, that there is people that actually are connected to the work.
I think that's very important. We are producing a new work now with Alexandra Pirici, who's a Romanian choreographer, really, who was in the Romanian Pavilion in Venice 2 years ago. And we are actually acquiring the work, because we feel, as a state institution, to own those works sometimes is very important, because the works that are acquired write the history. And these works are usually very difficult to acquire, and I think we do it with this work because it's actually possible to re-perform it, whereas some of those works you could never reenact them, of course. But I think it's a key question, because we write one line of history in the museums, and then the other one is kind of lost in oblivion. There's another question here.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, to bring it back to where Magdalena started off describing this shift that's happening right now, and listening to you all being very embracive of the risk, which is really interesting to listen to, but also this aspect of independent artists and curators stepping out of the studio and working with the surroundings, and there are lots of really exciting projects going on in Stockholm, and how you as institutions or organizations keep in touch with those kind of projects, or in dialogue with these kind of independent artists or curators. Could you, any of you,
I can
talk a little bit about that?
Put my neck on the line. By saying that I do absolutely no scouting whatsoever as one of my blind spots in my practice, and the reason for that is that I just don't have the time. But a way for me to bridge that is actually by sheer fluke. We also became the runners of a studio complex back in 2006, and And so we've housed 70 artists in that studio complex, and that's become part of our operative funding as well. So we offer cheap rents to artists, and then they and we run the studio complex. And we've just expanded to 4,000 square meters in the former Swedish television house in Värtahamnen. And part of that is to also encourage artists to experiment with their practice outside of the studio complex. So the making of this studio complex also involves a collaboration program and trying to utilize the critical and creative capital of that place. So we just started very basic, but so beautiful is that we can every other week we have a studio bar where we get each artist to give self-presentations and introduce themselves to their neighbors, and through that way it's very relaxed and but also really productive, because you can get into the to the aims and of the artist practice at the moment. And also we have feedback sessions where artists can try out new ideas, and also if they come up with some sort of problem, they can solve that with the help of the creative capital of the studio complex.
I want to answer this question, then I have a thing to say. The way we connect with all the non-profit spaces or like new initiatives by artists and curators around the world is because every second year we form a new advisory board of curators that nominate the projects, and when we do that we take particular care in really trying to research on all those curators and artists that are running spaces in their locales. Sometimes, you know, can be, we started the first year, it was Gabi Kobo running the Center for Historical Reenactments in Johannesburg, where institutions were unable to deal with the contemporary practice, and they have been of immense help. So we wanted to connect with that practice of the space, because we thought it was really the way to connect with what it means social engagement now there, or Beirut with Sarah Rifki in Cairo, or with Beta Local, or in Puerto Rico, or Lugar a Dudas in Colombia. So really to try to research on all those spaces, because most of the times from those spaces you have those are the spaces where new discourse, new narratives are created. And another thing about language, because there's something that we started to discuss before. Because if we mention a gallery, a Kunsthaus, a Kunsthalle, a museum, you all know what we're talking about. But when we mention these institutions, there's always so many doubts, like what they're really doing, you know, what is their audience, who are they talking to? It's really vital for us to address those questions. So we always had this question, like, how do we simplify our language without losing what we are? How do we simplify the process of such a complex procedure in something graspable? So that's why we brought you a video to present, but not so much because we want to show off, but it's more because we wanted to test it, if you allow.
Of course.
Because I think it's very new, and it's a trailer, and we want to tell in few words what we do. We had to simplify the language, because in a video it's really like, but we thought this could be, because the answer is to present us, so we thought maybe it's nice to test this video.
Can we will do that in 1 second.
Yeah, sure, I just wanted to bring that up.
We will just, Claire just wanted to get back to the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to specifically answer your question, just to say that one of the things that we've been trying in the UK is running workshops for artists and young producers across the whole of the country, looking at public realm. So we have a new situationist program, which is open submission to artists to work in the public realm for the first time. But the other thing that we did is that we, which I think a number of us have done, which is that we took our skills that we've learnt elsewhere overseas and brought them home. So we now produce something called the Art Weekender, which is a festival across the whole city, which is open to young artists and artist initiatives. So one of the things I think that you call us institutions, but organisations like us can do is we're very good at producing. So we know how to create a framework for something that shines a spotlight on things that aren't able to have that spotlight. So we do mentoring programs for artist initiatives to write funding applications, and so I think there's really simple ways that actually we can bring some of that knowledge And in turn, we learn enormously from those partnerships with young artist initiatives, things about the city that we just wouldn't know. So.
Sorry, but I'm going to let you show you. But two things. Part of the collaboration program is also my own curatorial practice to try and institutionalize that within the framework of a studio complex. So we don't only have cultural workers there, but we also have some, not so many, but at least some practitioners from outside of the artistic practice, which is something that we, or at least in Mossutställningar's practice, we've always done that, is to bring forth different types of actors. And to try and find juxtapositions between artists and their practice and other fields of society. So one of the productions that we've recently failed to produce was to do a TIFO with our in-house football supporters club and Apens Graf, which is a LGBTQ arts association, to make a TIFO together. It didn't work out, unfortunately, and reasons for that is mainly because we're so thinly spread that we couldn't really put in the juice that we needed. But in time, maybe we'll get there again. And then secondly, after Matteo's film or before, I'd really love to know more about the artistic practices that you're talking about that are currently happening in Stockholm.
Yes, I think so. I think it's Matteo's go. Can we? No, we're just watching the film now. Can we start it?
The project was born of a common commitment by Cittadel Art and Fondazione Zegna. We are looking for art that innovates our society. Ideas that respond to different places and urgencies, connecting communities to bridge gaps and create possibilities. When art leaves its field and becomes part of something else. Visible is a global research project in contemporary art, devoted to artwork in the social sphere, that aims to produce and sustain socially engaged artistic practices. Artists initiate processes of innovation in the environment, the economy, nutrition, education and equality, among others. We help these ideas break out to a common ground.
I think Visible provides the means in which that breakout can happen, in which we can start to theorize from one local practice to another and start to develop a sense of almost a movement, a process in which artists are thinking about their ethical position, thinking about what they want to do to achieve the common good rather than the good for themselves.
That's why we initiated the first European Award for social engagement in the artistic field to generate new awareness and ongoing discourse on the role of art in our contemporary societies. We make this knowledge public through utilities like publications, exhibitions, workshops, talks, library, and other activities. Every second year, a production prize of 25,000 euros is awarded through a public jury, in partnership with prestigious contemporary art museums. The shortlisted projects could use your support to contribute to their development in creating new forms of social innovation, when art becomes visible as something else.
To say that artists doing it for themselves, the work for themselves, that this was not for themselves but for others, as if that was not always true.
Are you implying that artists are usually working only for themselves? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
I found that very proactive.
Yeah, I think what Charles Sesche wanted to say is the idea that those artists that already do that can get a sense of not being alone, because sometimes, you know, we're talking about so many different art scenes. For example, in Italy, the art system, the commercial art system is the dominant one. So somebody operating more for a common good is certainly feeling more alone than in other places. So that's what he meant, you know, also creating a platform where people could connect and can think that, okay, I'm doing this, but I'm not alone. You know, there are many other contexts in which this is something that an artist feel they need to do. So that's what he meant, not that it implies that it's something new, or, I mean, it has always been existing, and it's more about when you look at it from a global perspective, I think you need to find bridges, connections, I think. That's what I think he was trying to point out.
I think we have maybe one more question or comment, and then we should wrap up. Yes, Eddie.
I just wanted to...
Could you just present yourself?
Yes, my name is Eddie Muka. I work as curator at Statens konstråd with the temporary projects. So I'm very interested in the panel, of course, and wanted to say that the film had a little bit of religious undertone. It was about converting. Anyway, I just wanted to go back to the previous question that somebody in the audience asked and follow up on that a little bit, because in the beginning we spoke about a shift. It's a shift in interest, but it's also a shift within the field. It's a shift that consists in more institutions and initiatives turning their attention and opening up towards the public space, which has been sort of the domain of the artists and the expression of their dissent, if you like. This shift has created a new dynamics, which on one hand side, hopefully is opening up the institutions, but on the other hand side is bringing in the artists. Maybe I have two questions. How does that affect one and the other, this kind of shift? And the other thing has to do with the fact that, do you think that the shift has to do with an increased awareness about the role of the artist that relates to what Charles mentioned? Like, are we trying to redefine the role of the artist? Or is it merely dictated by the necessity to provide the platform or the openness of the institutions that they are looking to reach out to publics, which museums are losing, and the society, by getting more mixed in its composure, dictates that kind of need. You know, we need to rethink, how do we relate to people? People is not interested so much, maybe, because everybody has their mobiles and their iPads. So why do they have to go to the museum? So even the museums are trying to look out now. Maybe I lost the thread of what I was saying, but I kind of had two questions in there. So if you can remember what I said, maybe you can try to answer.
Just to say, I agree with you, because also the video shown here is preaching to the converted, I think. So it's more, I think what we wanted to do was something that could speak to a non-specialist audience, so to try to use a very simple language. But other than that, thanks for the feedback. And I think that's what we do, really position itself in between these two readings that you gave of the role of the artist and the instrumentalization of it within a museum context where museums lose their audiences, and these artists, these practices can create new bridges to other audiences that maybe have no interest in walking in a museum nowadays. So that's also the idea of the visible, this title that is very simple, but it's really about the idea that you have artists that have develop a certain awareness about reality, that reality is not just what you get, what you are told it is, but is what is made visible. And an artist can really do with their work this kind of this kind of shift within the perception of reality. And the reason why we bring these practices to museums is really to try to bring this kind of awareness, this kind of discourse within museum. The debate that the museums is already going on, and we think that these practices needs to be there. They shouldn't just be mentioned by others, but they really have to be there to show what they are actually doing within society.
And also bringing the artist inside in the institution, it's very important, because the institution you can change only from the inside. And for example, it was very interesting, the project from Matteo, the Silent University, was developed in the Tate in the beginning, and it was a big discussion also for this institution to have such a political project inside. So they had really a debate also if they accept to have this project, because they had to change some functions with how they are functioning in that sense. So it's very important to bring these new ideas of artists inside in the institutions.
I'm going to say something a bit controversial, which is I'd like to sort of name the elephant in the room, which is that in the art world, the market is driven by the individual artist's name. We know that the price of the artwork and the way in which the market works functions on the basis of an individual. And therefore, within the visual arts world, it's very important to be in awe of the artist. And I have a real problem with that as a visual arts curator. I see lots of my curators in awe of the artist and speaking about putting the artist first. And that's not that I don't respect artists normally, because I do, and I follow their dreams and their visions. But the processes that I see really happening in this kind of work is it's not the artistic genius alone in a garret at the top of a castle in their studio, and then coming out and opening the door and come and see my genius, you know, of what I've done. It's a highly collaborative process through discussion. Their vision is often at the heart of that, and that might be a group of artists. But it happens through working with engineers, designers, curators, producers, participants, funders, local residents, etc. So I think what I would really love to get rid of is any discussion around defining the role of the artist, because I just think it's a waste of time. I really do. Because actually when I work with people from theatre, and this might be interesting to hear Bo's point, it's so refreshing, and theatre has its own hang-ups, let's not deny that. But what is really refreshing about working with theatre producers is it is a collaborative process. You have the writer at the heart of it, but the whole thing comes to life through a collaborative process. And because the market's not involved in the same way. So it's very refreshing.
Can I just reformulate one of the questions that I had, because it's related to what you're saying. But how does this, because we speak about the effect that Silent University has on Tate. How does Tate affect Matteo Good? And what happens? Because it cannot be one way, it's a both way kind of process. And what I'm saying is, I just want to raise up the question, is there a risk that someone becomes a star and becomes someone you have to owe then in the same way? So what is, from your experiences, what happens? What is the dynamics?
Of course, I mean, we're part of the system, you know, and we hear about artists because they achieve a profile, you know, and part of our job is to seek out those artists that are not achieving that market profile. But, you know, I wonder how many I'm not going, but wonder how many curators are going to Venice next week, and we know that the systems by which artists are invited there to represent their countries are deeply tied into the market. So you can't escape it. I guess I'm just sort of saying, I don't think we should fetishize the role of the artist in the way that it's about respect for artistic integrity, but it's also about respect for the other skills that are at the table, I think.
I totally agree with Claire, and whenever I speak about the role of the artist, I hear speaking about this, I always say the artist is a citizen, like many others. So he has other tools, other skills, but then a plumber, let's say, but both citizens. And from that very common ground that things can happen. And coming to Matteo Good, I think what we observed through the prize was a project that was had been also manipulated by Tate, of course, because of their needs. And an artist, and we saw an artist and a group of people, of collaborators, of migrants or refugees, that really felt that it was their project, fighting to obtain their space, to the point that actually they are in discussion to have a permanent place for the project within the new building at Tate. But then we also saw a project that moved from Tate, and now it's currently in Amman, in Jordan, and then in Hamburg. And in these two cases, the project is directly involving refugee shelters, refugee institutions. So you see also how the project itself that could have been affected just by an art institution is actually moving out towards by being an autonomous model within another field of society that started from art and went somewhere else.
I think we should wrap up. So did you want to have a last comment, Bo? Or shall we end it here?
Yes, I think, like, for me it's very easy. The work is the most important thing when we do a project like this. And I think the artist, when you collaborate with the artist, you have that in common. The work, not the artist, in a way, you know, not to say it a little bit brutal. And you can see that if you see Mike Kelly's work with the house, you don't think about Mike Kelly in that sense. You think about the work, but if you see his other work, you think a lot about Mike Kelly. So in somehow, I kind of like also that kind of communication. So I agree with you. We should not make that as a... No, I think it's also... No, but it's also a very matter of trust to work like this also. And everyone gets dirty.
That is very interesting. I often think that if you work and you want to step into reality, you have to be prepared to get your hands a bit dirty. And I think that's part of this as well. Thank you so much for coming here. I'm very, very happy to have you here. And thank you so much also to the audience for being here. Thank you.